following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back talking vintage sports from the old garden in New York City on 49th Street. We're right outside of Nedick's in our memories, and we're reliving it all. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We have a hell of a full house today. So let me start. We have Hal Bock. We have David Hubler. We have George Case III.
Hi, everybody.
Don Stokes coming back, becoming a semi-regular on the show. And who am I forgetting? I'm sorry. Blanking
Me.
Al
Me.
Blumkin.
I didn't hear me.
David Hubler and Al Blumkin.
Hello there, everybody. Hiya.
Everybody's here. Thank you for bearing with me. We have a special topic, one of my favorites of all time. When I was a kid, in the winter, we'd sit around and talk Wilt versus Russell. And what I'd like to do is break it down to the whole Boston Celtics versus Wilt when he played with three different teams. He played with the Philadelphia Warriors when he came up, went to the Lakers, and came back to Philadelphia with the Sixers. And there was, I think there was twice with once with the Lakers, and once with the Sixers when they won it all. Am I correct, guys? Was it twice?
But not against him.
Not right. Not against him. So, Al Blumkin, let's start with you. Let's talk a little bit first how the Celtics were built initially and how Russell coming in to the league changed the game, and then how Wilt changed it when he came in.
Okay, the Celtics for several years were based on offense with Bob Cousy, Bill Sharman, and Easy Ed McCauley, and they couldn't rebound very, very well. So what happened in the 1956-57 season, before that, the Celtics used their territorial draft to draft a forward out of Holy Cross by the name of Tommy Heinsohn. And when Bill Russell became eligible for the draft, Red Auerbach, who ran the Celtics, wanted him very, very badly. Now, even though Russell was going to miss the first third of the season because he committed to play for the Olympic team, which was in Melbourne, Australia that year, and he convinced Les Harrison, along the Rochester Royals, to draft Cy Hugo Green. He told Harrison that he couldn't afford Russell anyway, because Rochester played in a very, very small arena and basically was not a major league town. And then the second pick belonged to Ben Kerner, who owned the St. Louis Hawks. And Russell had indicated that he did not want to play in St. Louis because it was pretty segregated at that time. So Auerbach convinced Kerner to draft Russell with the second pick, and then he did that, and he traded Russell to the Celtics for Easy Ed McCauley, who was from St. Louis and wanted to go back home, and Cliff Hagan, who was one of the Kentucky boys, along with Frank Ramsey. Hagan eventually would turn out to be a very good player for the Hawks, but the Celtics landed Russell, and he became basically the first player in N.B.A. history to start blocking shots. And it turned the whole the addition of Russell and Heinsohn turned the whole Celtic team around, and they became the best team in the league. And that first season, they were able to win their first championship. They beat the St. Louis Hawks in 7 games, the 7th game going into double overtime. That started Bill Russell's 11 record of 11 championship teams in 13 seasons, which is something that will never be, my opinion, will never be duplicated.
May I give some credit to the coach, Arnold?
Auerbach built the team. Yeah,
but not just that. When he acquired Russell was like a raw product. He gave up. Macaulay was a pretty good N.B.A. player, if not.
Macaulay wanted to go home. I think he had a illness with one of his children.
Oh, okay. All right. And Hagan turned out to be a damn good forward for years and years. And Auerbach getting to see or looking ahead and seeing in his mind's eye Russell's development. And I don't think he expected what he got, for sure.
Russell was coming off 2 NCAA championships and an Olympic gold medal. Yeah, he knew that the talent was there.
That's very true. But what I saw with the Celtics over the years was an abundance of small forwards. Heinsohn was pretty much the same kind of player as Macaulay. You had Havlicek coming in later on, Ramsey. Both those guys were more forwards than guards, and they went to the backcourt as well as swingmen. But he was a tremendous scout. I guess that's in those days these guys did all their own scouting and developing and what have you.
Well, another year or so they would draft. They would use their first round pick to draft an unknown out of something called North Carolina College by the name of Sam Jones, who would turn into be one of the most devastating clutch players in the history of the league.
Yeah, of all those guys, Al, you've always said of Greer and these terrific guards that were down on the totem pole from Oscar, you thought that Sam Jones, if he had played on a team where he could have been.
Well, Sam Jones. If you look at Greer's playoff numbers, they're not very good. Okay. His career playoff numbers. Sam Jones was the tougher the game was, the better he got.
Okay. We're going to go from Al Blumkin on Bill Russell and the Celtics to Hal Bock, and let's set the tone a little bit by talking about how Wilt came in, the circumstances behind his draft, him coming to Philadelphia, the territorial rights, and what have you, and how that further changed the game of basketball.
Well, Wilt was over 7 feet tall, and he just dominated, except when he played against Russell. I had a 2-hour interview with Bill Russell, which I wished had gone 4 hours. It was one of the most memorable interviews I had in 50 years of writing sports. And we talked a bit about his rivalry with Wilt. And you should know that they played 94 games against each other. And Russell, even though the statistics went Wilt's way, Russell won 57 of those games, 57 to 37. Russell said he used to call Wilt Norman because that was Wilt's middle name, and it would infuriate him. And he did that deliberately to get Wilt off his game. Wilt was a great offensive player. Russell was a great defensive player. And that was the difference. Or the rebounding. I mean, Russell was a great, great rebounder. And I went to interview Wilt one time, and he intimidated me. I mean, not by anything he said or did, by standing up. I'm a pretty big guy, but I came up to his waist. It was scary.
And not just tall, he was pretty wide too.
My God! And you think to yourself,
he wasn't unselled, but he certainly was. He was a thoroughbred. I mean, you looked at him and you said, and other sports as well, track and field, volleyball. He was
because of his size. I mean, he was intimidating, and he's great athletic talent. Don't forget, he scored 100 points in one game. There are teams that didn't score 100 points in one game. So, I mean, he was a remarkable athlete and a remarkable basketball player. But in my mind, and God knows I'm not a professional scout or a professional coach, but in my mind, Russell, because of other things that he did, was better for your team. I would not have traded Russell for Wilt. That never came down. That was never an issue. But it just seems to me that Russell did more things for his team than Wilt did or could for his teams.
Right. Well, he had certainly had superior teammates around him. Not that.
Yes, he did. There's no question about that. And Al Blumkin mentioned Sam Jones. I would mention one of Russell's college teammates who later played with him with the Celtics. K.C. Jones was a pretty darn good guard as well. So
yes.
They were the Jones boys. They were a pretty darn good combo to throw out there on the floor. And Russell benefited from that.
Cousy and Sharman going out, the Jones boys coming in, Havlicek. I think he had Pete Newell. Auerbach did. He had a funny way of filling out his roster at his last guy or two, his last man or two, was always an old vet in the N.B.A. I remember Carl Braun came over to be
David Hubler and I want you to remember an NYU guy named Satch Sanders, right?
I was just going to bring him up.
Absolutely.
I was just going to bring him up. Yeah.
David, you, if you would, tell us your memories when you were on the staff that Hal Bock was on. You wrote for the NYU
Square Journal. It was called. Mm-hmm. Yep.
What was it called?
Square Journal. We were down in Washington Square.
Okay. And tell me about Satch.
Well, he wasn't big by center standards, and he played center forward, but he was a tremendous athlete. I remember one time, at the time that we were there, NYU had one of the best fencing teams in the country. I forget the name of the coach, but he was like the Olympic coach, and in fact, yeah, that's right. And of course, he said that if Sanders hadn't played basketball, he would have made a great fencer because he had such arm reach, and also he had such great reflexes. So he could have trained him to be one of the world's best fencers. But Sanders had a great career at NYU. He led the team. The year that they went to the Final Four, unfortunately they ran into a tremendous Ohio State team and a Cal team. And the fourth team, I think, was, do you remember that, Hal? Was that the fourth team was West Virginia?
Virginia with Jerry West.
Yeah, with Jerry West.
And Cal with Darryl Imhoff, if I'm not
mistaken. That's right. That's right. But I remember, what I remember was that when Sanders was drafted by the Celtics, and this was one of these, later proved to be one of these moves that you realized how good Auerbach was at judging talent. Because I remember Sanders to the Celtics, my God, he'll last maybe a season. I mean, why in the world would they draft Sanders? Why would the Celtics draft him? Well, of course, he turned out to be one of their tremendous defensive ball players for a good number of years with Boston.
Was there 10 years.
Yeah, he played his whole career with Boston.
Yes, he did.
And then he wound up. But then subsequently he wound up. I keep saying wound up, but he eventually went to coach Harvard's basketball team for a number of years as well.
He did. That's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I have an interesting story about Chamberlain. When Chamberlain was about, again, this is brings us back to Red Auerbach, because he always not only recognized talent, but he sort of cultivated talent. Red Auerbach was a very good friend of Milton Kutcher, who owned Kutcher's Country Club up in the Catskills. And every year he would bring some of the ball players. He'd get them jobs at Kutcher's as waiters, busboys, whatever, just to get them some money. These mostly were high school or first-year college students. Before, in those days, they could not play varsity ball until they were sophomore years. And there's a very famous picture of Wilt Chamberlain as the bellhop who would greet arriving guests at the hotel, and he had about 3 suitcases under each arm. Right, standard size suitcases. Yeah, he could take in, and it was through Auerbach that he got that job up there, and they used to play this wonderful all-star game outdoors at night up there at Kutcher's, and I think one of the greatest basketball games I ever saw was there because they had Sharman and Cousy in the backcourt, Russell at center. I forget who. I know that Oscar Robertson was playing on the other side, and I think Chamberlain was actually playing on the other side as well. They play this every year. In fact, for a good number of years, it became the Maurice Stokes benefit game. If you remember Maurice Stokes.
Jack Twyman took care of him in his last few years, and on this All-Star benefit team. I was going to say that the Celtics would play an All-Star game in their scrimmages. So they just with themselves.
Yeah, with themselves.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get George Case, who played college basketball at that time. And I wanted to know if you played against Satch Sanders when you played with Rutgers, George.
Yeah, I did. I think I'd mentioned it before. I was a sophomore, was assigned to guard Satch Sanders, first team All-American NYU. I think this was my sophomore year, my first varsity game. And finally I had to tell our coach, I said, Coach, take me out. I'm embarrassed. Satch is a first-team All-American, great player, and I'm a young sophomore playing at Rutgers, not very good, but I'm playing. And Satch just, did a number on me, and so I always followed him after that because he was such a great player. And then, as David has mentioned, he went on to a tremendous career with the Celtics, and as Hal and David both know, Satch was also an intellectual. He was very bright. Wound up, I think, quite a few years coaching at Harvard. And,
yeah, he did.
He was just a great talent and a tremendous basketball player, and fit into that whole Celtics, teamwork kind of a thing. His defense and his ability was something that was there, and then some of the other guys could score, and Russell would be a defensive player. And with the Jones guys in the backcourt, and Tommy Heinsohn, who I knew. Also, they had earlier than that, they had Jim Luskatoff. They had another big guy, and I also knew Ed McCauley. A mention of Ed McCauley. Ed McCauley was really on the thin side, and I knew Ed from my later career in the athletic footwear business. Ed ran the 7-Up basketball coaches clinics out of St. Louis. So I think it was Alan mentioned he was a St. Louis native. So that's when I had a chance to meet Ed. And also one other guy, just wanted not to drop names, but, Wilt's early coach with the Philadelphia Warriors was Neil Johnston. And Neil was a great player for Philadelphia. And I happen to know Neil because Neil worked in the same company that I did. He sold golf equipment for Uniroyal, and I sold athletic footwear. And Neil and I used to laugh. We'd kid about each other, and he'd say, yeah, George said, I'd go in and talk to a golf pro about golf balls. All they wanted to talk about basketball, and I'd walk in to talk to somebody about athletic footwear, and all they wanted to talk about was baseball. Yeah. So, I knew a lot of those guys, and they were all, at the time that I was playing college basketball and when I was younger, remember all of them. And the Celtics Warriors rivalry was huge, and then later with the Sixers. But but Russell and Chamberlain, they hooked up for many memorable games.
Yeah, the Warriors at that time had, among others, Paul Arizin, who was all-league, and Guy Rogers.
From Temple.
Yeah, they had Guy Rogers was a great guard out of Temple, and Arizin was a terrific jump shooter, and they were a great club. They had individual stars, and I think they really depended, as Alan, they really depended upon Wilt because he was such a great scorer. But the fact that the Celtics seemed to have the Warriors' number many, many times, and Russell, blended in with that great team that he had there with Auerbach to really, defeat the Warriors many, many times. And of course, one other thing I just wanted to mention, and this was a trademark. If you'll remember Red Auerbach, what he would do when the game was decided. Do you remember what he would do?
Sure.
Oh, the cigar, of course, every cigar.
He'd light up his victory cigar.
That's right.
Right.
When we think back on our memories of the Garden, it was always smoke-laden with Auerbach.
Oh, yeah.
There was a blue haze up on the top deck. You couldn't see the actual roof of the Garden because this blue haze just hung over it for years on end. It just kept building and building.
That was the old days when everybody was smoking. I don't think you'd see that today, but that was his trademark, though, his victory cigar. He'd light up that cigar on the bench and said, "Hey, the ball game's over."
Yeah, Red Auerbach went
all on petri dishes.
He went to Auerbach.
Out,
Red Auerbach went to Eastern District High School in Brooklyn.
Who did?
Red Auerbach.
Oh,
that school no longer exists, but that's where he went.
Mr. Hubler, you can talk to his Washington Connect a little bit.
I don't know too much about his Connect. I do know that he is where he's buried. He's buried over here in Northern Virginia, not far from where my wife and I have plots. So I think somehow we'll connect in the next world. But I know he actually lived in Washington while he was coaching the Celtics. I know he had a place, I think, up on Connecticut Avenue, and he considered himself more of a Washingtonian than a native of Boston.
Yeah, and David, I think that Red's brother was also a graphic artist, and I think I've heard the story that he was one of the ones, maybe it was his creation of the Washington logo that the Senator of the Nationals used for many years.
Oh, really? No, I didn't know that.
I think, yes, I think that was Red Auerbach's brother.
Red Auerbach coached the Washington Capitals, who were a team in the early N.B.A. for a couple of years, and then he had the run, and then he went to work for Ben Carter, and it was what was then the Tri-Cities Blackhawks that eventually wound up to as a current Hawk franchise, and Auerbach and Carter did not get along, and Auerbach didn't even last the season there, and then the Celtics grabbed him.
Okay.
One of the great things.
I think Auerbach went to George Washington
University
in D.C.
Yes, he did.
So he had a connection between that and the fact that his first NBA job was in Washington.
Yeah, he did. That's true. He did go to GW. Just a quick note about the old Garden and the N.B.A. One of the great things about the early years of the N.B.A. and Madison Square Garden was that they would play double headers. It's totally unheard of today. But like the Knicks would play the Celtics and Philadelphia would play Syracuse on the same evening. You for one ticket, you just go in, whatever the seat, and you'd sit and you'd watch two NBA games, one right after the other. And you could watch the standings change too, because what about 8 teams in the old NBA?
Yeah.
So it was an East Division and a West Division, and so the standings could change just by watching one evening's worth of basketball.
Absolutely, those we got top-notch ball players. I mean, imagine how deep these teams were with only 8 teams in the league. Don Stokes, you're younger than us, so
everybody is.
Yeah, right.
That's very true. But I'm interested in your take. You were just a kid when these guys, if that, when these guys played. What's the legend like? Does Wilt come out on top, or does Russell? We were there in those days, but what's rewritten history, revisionist history, whatever you want to call it? How do they rank against each other in your eyes?
Well, I feel like I'm getting N.B.A. 101 here from you guys because I feel like a baby. You guys are talking about stuff about things that I had no idea about. But as far as Wilt and Russell is concerned, obviously Wilt doesn't get justification as far as his play is concerned as being a winner. Unfortunately, I mean, a lot of people like to say that Russell was on a better team. I don't know about that. I think Wilt did have some pretty good teams in his playing day, and unfortunately, Wilt comes across as being a little bit selfish in his play. He seemed to be concerned about statistical, getting a lot of points and rebounds, and all his teams always seem to meet in the finals against the Celtics. He only won 1 of 7, or 1 of 8, I believe. And for some reason, Wilt just comes across as someone being selfish, and Russell, he was a great team player, and you could say he was the greatest winner in sports. He won 11 championships and only lost 2. And Wilt only beat him head-to-head 1 time in the playoffs. I believe it was in the Eastern Conference of 1967 when he played for the Sixers.
Right, exactly right.
Wilt.
Yeah.
And I remember the 1969 NBA Finals when Jack Kent Cook had the balloons stuck up in the rafters because they were expecting the Lakers to beat the Celtics finally. And I guess Russell got wind of it, and he made a big speech about it in the locker room before the game. And they went out there and beat Wilt pretty badly in that series, in that game. And also Wilt got hurt, if I recall, and he wasn't brought back in. I guess he later said that he was actually injured, but as it turned out, he just didn't want to come back in. And I remember Russell had made some comments about it later on that year, and from what I understand, they didn't talk to each other for 20 years behind this. But if I had to pick somebody to win a Game 7, it would be Russell because he was 10-0. So nothing against Wilt Chamberlain. He scored quite a few points, but unfortunately he didn't help his team, and he didn't appear to enjoy practice very much. Not that anybody does, but he was considered a malcontent and a guy who refused to move from New York when he played for Philadelphia, and he would just commute all the time, and it drove the coaches crazy.
You're right about that, Don. He did. I just did some reading about that. I forgot about it, but yeah, Wilt lived in New York, and he would take the train or drive to Philly. And Dolph Shays, when he was coaching the Sixers, he would schedule practices at 4:00 in the afternoon, which annoyed the rest of the teammates because they wanted to have a morning practice and the rest of the day to themselves. And he did it because of Wilt. Wilt couldn't get down from New York to Philly until the afternoon, and that's when the Sixers scheduled practices.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's an interesting story. When the Knicks held Wilt to 100 points that night in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Right.
Yeah.
Which they were pretty happy about, really, when you stop to consider it all. They drove in cars, separate cars, and they ended up driving Wilt back to New York. 2 or 3 players, I don't remember which ones they were, drove Wilt back to New York from Hershey that night. He fell asleep in the back of the car. And the Knicks driving him back to New York. Mr. Chamberlain, you get out here, sir. We're in front of your house, sir.
I guess that had to be a pretty big back seat for you tonight.
Yeah, one of the ironies is that outside that 1969 championship, the only other time that they faced each other in the finals, because usually Wilt was in the same division, in 1963-64, the San Francisco Warriors, they were in their second year out there in San Francisco. They made the finals. It's one of the few times the Lakers didn't make it during that era, and the Celtics beat them in 5 games. That's when they had Nate Thurman playing forward because Nate Thurman and Wilt were on the same team. And then the next season was when the Warriors traded Wilt back to Philadelphia. And Thurman was able to move to Denver.
He was a very, very underrated player. He was terrific. I think Russell said it best that nobody played him better defensively than Nate Thurman.
Of course, the Knicks passed him up for Artie Heyman in one of their brilliant moves.
Oh, yeah.
But that's a whole other story.
That was the 11th bad draft in a row with the Knicks.
We can do a whole program on bad Knick moves. It'll take forever.
You've got a lot of those stories, Alan.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, Don, you paid these guys the ultimate compliment. This is like basketball 101, and I'm thrilled with my all-star team. This has been a terrific show. George knew it would be, right, George?
Absolutely. That's fun for me.
Right.
Yeah, I have a little postscript about this. The whole story we've been talking about tonight. A number of years ago, when I was doing book reviews on Voice of America, come on, what's his name? Auerbach, but Red.
Yeah, Red Auerbach.
Oh, no, I don't want Red Auerbach.
Red Holtzman?
Red
Holtzman, thank you. Red Holtzman had written a book about his, the Knicks winning years, the few winning years they had. And in talking with him, he pointed out, he says, the Celtics always had great teams, but I'll tell you, he said they had more talent, but the team that I had, meaning the Knicks, was probably the smartest team that's ever been put together in the N.B.A. And he was talking about Havlicek, Bill Bradley, who else was on that club? He said that you didn't have to coach them at all. They knew right on the court how to react to what was going on, how to move, whatever. So that was the team with Bradley and Clyde the Glide, Frazier.
Yeah.
And
they had Willis Reed too, I think, wasn't he?
And Willis Reed.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Bill Bradley, Bill Bradley graduated. Bill Bradley graduated from Princeton and went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar,
right.
And he became, United States Senator, and as well as his great career with the Knicks. But Bill Bradley, I'll never forget. I was first year in the athletic footwear business. I called on Butch Van Vredekhoff, who was the Princeton coach, and he told me then. That's when Bradley was a freshman. He said, George. He said, he is something special. I mean, he's just amazing. And he was from Missouri, went to Princeton, a great scholar. And, as David and Hal and Alan mentioned, back then in around 65, and when I played, if you were a freshman, you could not play varsity basketball. You had to play for the freshmen. So I think in Princeton's situation, and I've heard a couple other times, the freshman team, I know, I think UCLA was the same thing with Lou Alcindor, Jabbar. The freshmen would beat the varsity because they were so much better, but they could not play varsity basketball during that era.
Right.
Okay,
and of course,
guys,
Bill Bradley didn't. If you looked at him, he did not have a basketball player's body.
No, he didn't. No.
He was kind of chunky and not particularly fast. But
no, he wasn't.
Tremendous shooter.
He was so smart. He was so intelligent. I mean, he moved without the ball. He knew how to get open. He knew where to pass. I mean, he was just an intellectual basketball player, not a great skilled player. But on the other hand, he knew how to play the game and did it from the time he was in high school. And I know Princeton was thrilled to get him. And he went on to a tremendous career both in basketball and politics. But Bill Bradley was probably, I don't know for sure, but he's the only one that I know about who was a Rhodes Scholar who played in the NBA.
Now, there's another one, I think, Tom McMillan.
Tom McMillan, sure, from Maryland.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
I think you're right, Alan. I saw Tom McMillan play when he was in high school. Great player. I forgot about it. I think you're right. I think he
is right. Yeah, Alan is right. Yeah.
And the first time I ever saw Bill Bradley live was in 1963. Pitt made the NCAAs, and they went. They were part of a triple header in the Palestra, and we lost NYU in the first game by 10 points. Happy Heston killed us, and then Princeton played. I believe it was St. Joe in the middle game, and the game went into overtime. Bill Bradley scored about 40, fouled out in the overtime, and they wound up losing by a point because once he went out, they were pretty bad.
That was another great venue for college basketball, the Penn Palestra.
Absolutely, it was. I mentioned earlier, one time on an earlier podcast, that was my first 2 points as a college basketball player. I scored at the Palestra. I was so excited. I got in a game. They threw me the ball. I turned around and threw in about a 40-foot jump shot. I had no ability to shoot that length of shot, but I guess for some reason the gods were looking out for me, and the ball went in.
And they didn't even give you a 3.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you were ahead of your time. You could have been a great 3-point shooter.
That was long before the 3-point line, and I was a terrible shooter. But for whatever the reason, that ball went in. So.
And in your mind's eye, you can still see it, right, George?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll never forget it.
Thank you, gentlemen. This was a terrific show. We will do it again next week, same time. Al, how do you say
Same bad time, same bad channel.
Beautiful. Love hearing that, Al. Love your voice. And, I really do enjoy these shows. I can't tell you what great memories they bring back. So thank you all collectively. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tyko, the weak link of it all.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, guys.